James, would thank you, sir, for taking a minute out. It's great to meet you. I appreciate it.
Perfect.
So let's begin our journey into your life by asking you this. One of the biggest things that we had to deal with in our probably collective history is going through this pandemic, the COVID time. How many ripples did that time period create for you that have affected the way that you do business and live your life now in 2024? Actually, yeah, sorry. I wanted to make sure we were recording. I apologize.
No worries. The pandemic was not the first time I have had something happen where my business went to zero overnight. The first time was 2008, when the economy crashed and nobody was hiring people to come in and speak and train. And so at that point, that's when I decided to start creating online events, online courses. Then, of course, pandemic, it happened again, so I wasn't that affected by it in terms of that. But when the pandemic happened, I remember thinking, you're not going to get paid for the next 3 months. So you might as well do something. And Queen Elizabeth came out and did a speech about the pandemic. And she had this line. She said, basically, it was something like, when this is over, we all want to be able to look back and be proud of how we conducted ourselves.
Hmm.
And I thought about that. And so what I did was I just started contacting clients and said, "Hey, I know you don't have money right now, but let me just come help. I'll do whatever." And so a bunch of clients took me up on that. And then I just talked to them about, you know, how to keep inspired, how to keep hope. And, it was meaningful for me. I didn't make any money on it, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's get to the heart and soul of all of these things that you do on a daily basis. And to do that, I want to put you in front of a bunch of third grade students at Career Day, 10, 11-year olds. One of the kids is curious in the back of the room and is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
When your dad comes home and he's in a bad mood because he has a terrible boss? Well, I'm the one that helps your dad have a better boss so that your dad can be happier and then take you to Disney.
Perfect. You're going to be the favorite special guest in that room. So, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream growing up?
I want to be an archaeologist.
Okay. Okay. And then you had mentioned that filmmaking was a part of your world as well.
Yes. What killed the archaeology dream was going on a dig and finding out how tedious it was and how boring, and there was no lost temple. And so I thought, okay, I got to pivot. And that's when I realized my love of story. And so then I thought, yeah, I want to make movies. So that's what I decided to go to college for.
What was the first movie that captivated your imagination that made you think, "I want to do that. I want to be behind the lens one day"?
It was, do you remember Henry V with Kenneth Branagh?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. That I watched that, and I just thought it was beautifully done. And one of the scenes there where the camera just goes for like 2 minutes without a cut or an edit, and I was captivated by this. But I came from a small town. I grew up on a cattle ranch, and so the thinking there was, you can't do that. Like, you can't make movies. That's just not for us, kind of thing. And I remember I was in Australia with a bunch of my buddies. I took a year off college and went down there, so didn't know what I wanted to do. And one day we rented a video camera and we just went around having fun. And at the end of that day, I thought, I love that. I loved doing that. And it was at that point I said, I don't care what anyone in my family or community says, I'm going to go make movies.
So did you make movies? How did all that transpire for you?
I never made movies. So what happened was I ended up transferring to a different college so I could go to film school. And it was then I started attending a church. And I didn't really grow up in church, but I was going to this church and I had a lot of fun. And then one day the preacher had said to me, "Hey, we need to hire someone for the summer to help out, set up events and things like that." I said, "Sure, it beats working at a restaurant." So I did. And that summer just completely changed how I viewed life. Like, it wasn't even so much about the religion. It was helping people and being part of their story, and being part of their transition. And that captivated me. And then next thing I know, I ended up going down this road and I went into ministry, and I was a preacher for a lot of years.
So what were the foundational seeds? You have a lot of things that are a part of you that could be considered right and left brain. There's so much that's going into to what you do for your work. What were those seeds early on that allowed you to get on stage and speak, to write, to want to be a filmmaker, to be in front of people and to preside spirituality? How did all of these things get planted into you?
I was deathly afraid of getting up in front of an audience. And every time that had ever happened throughout my life, it just gone terribly, mostly because I didn't prepare because I was so afraid and just avoiding it.
Yeah.
And it was one summer in college when that same preacher had said to me, "Hey, can you get up in front of this church and talk for 5 minutes on what you're learning?" And I remember thinking, like, I'm no good at this. But I remember having a moment where I thought, well, can you just stop like judging yourself for a moment? Could you just maybe go and actually just go for it so that if you're going to blow it, at least like make it a good story?
Yeah.
And so I prepared. And then when I showed up, I decided, I'm going to be passionate about this and just kind of this reckless abandon. And then I went and did it. And then after that 5 minutes, people started coming up to me saying, "Hey, you should do more of this." And
Yeah.
so that tiny seed there, I guess, gave me permission, like, oh, maybe I don't suck at this like I have told myself for a decade.
Yeah.
And that began a journey for me of learning the craft of speaking, speaking in public, speaking on stages, structuring messages. And I think that combined with my love of story and my desire to go into film, then that set me apart as a speaker. Even as a preacher, people knew me as the storyteller preacher, and it resonated with them.
So, coming from being a preacher and the spiritual part of this, you know, I remember the first time I saw the Grand Canyon being a kid from Kansas City, never seeing contour, never seeing mountains. And the Grand Canyon's a different spectrum. But I remember when I saw that, I was like, there's a God. Not that I questioned it, but I just knew there's no way that this is an accident. What was that moment for you as a preacher? Did you have a spiritual moment where you were confirmed in some empirical way or in some very strong notion that you knew that there was a creator?
I knew there was a creator early on, growing up on a cattle ranch, spending summer days just walking in the valley by myself, exploring, like me and my dog. Like I said, I wasn't raised in church. We didn't have a religious family. But just even then, I was just this little kid walking in the valley talking to God because I just believed he was there. So I don't have this epiphany moment other than a little bit like I grew up, my father had me skiing so young, I don't remember learning to ski.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like that with my faith.
So, who's been that hero for you? Who's been that bedrock, that inspiration that's allowed and fueled you to evolve into who you are?
It would definitely be both my parents. My parents are so different. My father is pragmatic, take control. And then my mom is more like Reiki. She's got crystals. And, my dad would roll his eyes at that. So, and both of them live in me. So I can hear someone talk about manifestation and half of me is rolling my eyes and the other half of me is like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If you could meet anybody on the planet right now that you find inspirational, that you could get something from them that would help you as a professional and as a human being, who would you love to hang out with and meet and ask questions to?
I mean, an hour ago I would have said Joe Dimino, but since we're having this conversation, I have to come up with a new name.
All right, I love it. So let me ask you this. Of all of these things that you've done, you've had to take risks. There's big decisions that we make. What's the biggest risk that you've taken in your life?
The biggest risk I took in my life was getting divorced
Yeah.
because I was still in a leadership position in the church, and churches are terrible at how they handle divorces.
Yeah.
Not all churches, just most. And that decision to leave my marriage, it's a long story, which we won't get into, but that was the biggest risk for me in terms of what it meant for my family, my children, all of that. So it wasn't a business per se. Every risk after that is just doesn't seem as risky.
Yeah. I understand. I've been in that boat. So, as an adventurer and living in the mountains, what's been one of the best adventures that you've gone on? You obviously love the outdoors. What's the adventure that you went on that just stands as the epic moment for you?
It's the one that I talk about when I do my keynote, and it's about a mountain that we climbed in Bolivia. It's the highest mountain in the country, Mount Sahama. It's 21,400 feet. And it is a story of, I am definitely not the hero of that story. I mean, halfway up, I was so tired. I was trying to sabotage the expedition to get other people to quit so I could go down without quitting. I mean, it's just when you're really tired, some of your worst parts of you come out. But in the end, we made it to the summit, and it was a great achievement. It was a lot of fun.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
The best advice I've ever gotten. The best advice I'd ever gotten, that would be a tough one. I think it's the same advice that's become my mantra, which is I believe in me.
Yeah.
That's what helps me get through all risks or when business is struggling or tough. I just come back to that. I believe in me because life is so much of life is think of like you're in a poker game
Hmm.
and you've got to go all in on you. Anybody who launches a business, you're going all in on you. That's what it is. Or if you're going to leave your job and start a business, you're just going all in on you. That's what so much of life is about.
So, as a motivational speaker, what's the best speech that you've personally witnessed in your life?
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
The best speech that you've ever witnessed in your life as a motivational speaker, what was the best one you've ever seen?
The best speech I've ever seen that I've ever witnessed. That's a difficult one, but I will. The one that comes to mind was a speaker, I forget his name, and he was in a wheelchair, and I think he'd been burned in a fire. And he started his presentation talking about being a prisoner of his chair. And while he was doing that, he was rolling down the aisle, towards me. And he began talking about being a prisoner in this chair. And then he made the flip to how none of us are any different, that we're all a prisoner by the fears that we have. And
Yeah.
just as his chair was a limiter, your fear is a limiter. I still remember that moment. It was one of the best openings I've ever seen.
Wow, that's powerful. So, of all of these things that you do, I'm curious, what gets you up every day? What is your motivator? What is it that propels you to do such a good job at what you do as a professional, but also to cultivate and evolve as a human being? What is that collective energy for you every day?
My kids are in their 20s. It's not easy for them as they look ahead. And so much of what I do is for them. Of course, there's the flawed parts of me that wants to be more successful, and you're always trying to find different things to do there. But it's my kids for sure.
So, if you had a dream tonight, you ran into that younger version of you in Canada, trying to figure out what you wanted to do with your life, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
I would tell the younger version of me that as soon as you stop caring so much about what everyone thinks of you, your life is going to take off.
Yeah. Of all these things that you've done and accomplished, what are you the proudest of?
I'm most proud of my children, of course. Not that that's an accomplishment, but raising them. I think of all the things in my life, you know, like anyone, I've got my successes and I've got a ton of failures. I think the thing I've done the best is be a dad. And I'm proud of that. It's ongoing for sure, but that's what's most important to me.
So the one thing I wanted to point out, and I've seen how many people that you've shared the stage with. The one speech that I saw in my life that was the most profound, and I remember it to this day, and it was 20 years ago, was Bill Clinton came to the Truman Library here in Kansas City. And I still remember when the doors opened up and he came in the room, all the particles changed. Everything just there was a level of acumen and just taking command that I'd never seen in my life. And I still remember, solar panels on skyscrapers in New York. I remember all of the material after 20 years. And there was no recording. All it is in my memory, but it's amazing how those moments will totally transform and motivate people.
My parents saw him speak and they passed on a story that he had said. I didn't hear him say this, but he passed on a story of Nelson Mandela and him chatting. And he asked the question to Nelson Mandela, how could you forgive all those guys after everything they'd done? And he said, I knew when I left the jail that if I didn't leave my hate behind, I would still stay in that prison. Something to that effect. And I thought, wow, that's a powerful story.
Yeah. And I think about him coming out and he realized that what he had fought for came to fruition and there was an entire movement in that society. That had to be absolutely monumental,
Absolutely.
to see that. So at the end of the day, James, everyone has a perception of you family, friends, all of your readers, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am?
Yeah.
I think I'm a very creative person who continually believes that I can do more. And I believe I'm somebody who I have a gift of being able to find stories and tell them that give hope to other people and inspiration to help them, you know, rekindle their own faith in themselves.
So, as an adventurer, I got to know what is one of the most unexpectedly beautiful, magical places on this planet that you've been to?
Iguazu Falls would be the number one on the top of the list in terms of just mind blowing
Yeah.
in Brazil on the Brazil Bolivia border. Second to that would be near where I grew up, which is Moraine Lake in Canada or Lake Louise. If you've ever been there, a lot of tourists have. That's not so much adventure, but more just traveling to those places. But it would be those. And I'll throw in a third, and it was on a backpacking trip into the Rockies, and a storm hit during the night. And it was a miserable night, which makes for the best memories, of course. But when we were hiking out of there the next day, just all around us, all these cliffs, there are just these waterfalls cascading everywhere that wouldn't have happened without the storm. And so sometimes the most beautiful moments are right after a storm. And you just got to hold on to that when you're going through it.
Well said. So, if anyone wants to pick up your book, anybody wants to reach out, hire you, learn more, any of the good business, where do they go?
Go to jamesrobbins.com. And I've got a new book coming out in August, which I'm really excited about, which is all about reconnecting with your soul when we get away from it. How do you disappear for a little while and work on you, get realigned, and come back out ready to go? So that's coming out in August. Really excited about that. But all of that information you can find jamesrobbins.com.
Perfect. James, so great to meet you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful holiday season.
Joe, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, we're out, man. Hey, thank you. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it.
All right, Joe, you're